British, October 12, 1944, Valdris Valley, Norway. Oberst Helena Steinberg adjusted her field glasses, scanning the aurora-lit fjords stretching toward the North Sea. Her 4th Fallschirmjäger Regiment held defensive positions along the Nordkapp Peninsula. Elite female paratroopers who had conquered Denmark and survived the brutal Arctic campaigns. What Steinberg didn't know was that within 48 hours, American paratroopers would execute the most audacious night infiltration in airborne history, turning her own precision tactics against her in a battle that would redefine vertical warfare forever and challenge every assumption about women in combat. The bitter autumn of 1944 found the Wehrmacht's most unusual regiment in their strongest defensive position since the invasion of Norway. Oberst Helena Steinberg commanded 2,400 veteran Fallschirmjäger of the 4th Regiment, the Third Reich's only all-female airborne unit, positioned along a 15-kilometer front between Tromsø and Alta. These weren't the auxiliary personnel filling support roles elsewhere. These were jump-qualified combat veterans who understood mountain warfare and airborne operations with surgical precision. Steinberg had earned her position through exceptional performance rather than political connections. Born in 1915 in the Bavarian Alps, she had competed in alpine skiing before the war, developing the mountain expertise that made her invaluable when Germany needed specialists for Arctic operations. Her recruitment into the experimental female paratroop program in 1942 came after she demonstrated tactical brilliance during Wehrmacht mountain warfare exercises in Austria. The 4th Regiment's formation had been controversial within German military circles. Traditionalists argued that women lacked the physical strength and psychological resilience for elite combat operations. Steinberg proved them wrong during the 1943 Lofoten Islands campaign, where her regiment executed flawless nighttime drops behind British Special Forces positions. Her paratroopers demonstrated not just equal capability, but superior performance in reconnaissance, marksmanship, and small unit tactics. At her command post, carved into the granite cliffs of Mount Kvaløya, Steinberg studied intelligence reports spread across a table fashioned from aircraft aluminum. The map showed Allied convoy routes through the Barents Sea, marked with precise notations in her distinctive handwriting. Her tactical philosophy emphasized economy of force, achieving maximum effect with minimum exposure. Every position was calculated, every firing lane predetermined, every withdrawal route rehearsed until it became instinctive. The Oberst had analyzed every Allied airborne operation since Operation Torch in North Africa. American paratroopers followed predictable patterns: massive daylight drops into predetermined zones, overwhelming firepower to compensate for tactical simplicity, reliance on radio coordination and heavy equipment. The Americans excelled at industrial warfare, mass production of soldiers and supplies, but they lacked the nuanced approach that German airborne doctrine demanded. Intelligence reports confirmed her assessment. The American 82nd Airborne Division remained in England, reportedly rebuilding after devastating losses during Operation Market Garden. Standard German intelligence estimated they wouldn't achieve combat readiness for another 8 weeks. Even if they were operational, American doctrine prohibited large-scale night operations above the Arctic Circle. Too many variables, too much risk, too complex for their methodical approach to warfare. Steinberg's confidence wasn't mere arrogance, it was based on mathematical precision. Her regiment controlled observation posts that could detect aircraft movements 50 kilometers away. Radar installations at Hammerfest and Kirkenes provided overlapping coverage of all approach routes. The mountainous terrain channeled any airborne assault into predictable landing zones, all of which were pre-registered for artillery and mortar fire. Major Ingrid Müller, commanding the regiment's 2nd Battalion, shared her commander's confidence. At 29, Müller was a veteran of the Caucasus Campaign, where she had earned the Iron Cross First Class for leading a company-sized assault on Soviet mountain positions. Her 400 paratroopers occupied the most critical sector, overlooking the Altan Fjord and its strategic submarine pens. Müller's tactical setup reflected years of combat experience. Her companies were positioned in mutually supporting triangles, with each strong point capable of independent operation for 72 hours. Communication lines were buried or run through natural rock formations, making them nearly impossible to sever. Supply caches were hidden in glacier crevices and abandoned mine shafts, providing backup resources if main supply lines were cut. The Major maintained meticulous intelligence files on Allied capabilities. American paratroopers had never operated successfully above 60 degrees north latitude. The extreme conditions, 18 hours of darkness, temperatures below -20 Celsius, unpredictable Arctic weather, exceeded the limits of standard Allied equipment and training. Even elite units like the Rangers and British Commandos avoided winter operations in northern Norway. 400 kilometers southeast, Brigadier General Sarah Mitchell stood before the assembled officers of the 82nd Airborne Division at RAF Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands. The All-American Division had indeed been bloodied at Nijmegen, losing 1,673 personnel in 9 days of urban warfare against determined German resistance. But Mitchell's appointment as the first female general officer in American airborne forces came with an impossible mission: neutralize Steinberg's regiment before they could interfere with Operation Nordvind, the planned Allied invasion of northern Norway.
Mitchell's rise through military ranks had been even more controversial than Steinberg's. The daughter of a Montana rancher, she had disguised herself as a man to enlist in 1940, serving with distinction in North Africa before her identity was discovered. Rather than facing court-martial, she was transferred to the newly formed Women's Army Corps and quickly identified as exceptional officer material. Her tactical brilliance during staff exercises caught the attention of General Omar Bradley, who recommended her for airborne training despite regulations prohibiting women in combat units. Ladies and gentlemen, Mitchell began, her voice carrying the authority earned through repeated combat commands. Intelligence estimates that Steinberg's regiment represents the Wehrmacht's most tactically sophisticated airborne unit. They have never been defeated in conventional operations. The silence in the briefing room reflected the magnitude of their challenge. Colonel Rebecca Hayes, commanding the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, studied operational maps with growing unease. The mission required inserting 1,400 paratroopers across 60 square kilometers of Arctic terrain at night in sub-zero conditions against an enemy that understood their own operational methods better than most American commanders. "General," Hayes ventured, consulting her notes, "this terrain negates every tactical advantage we've developed. No mechanized support, no close air support in these weather conditions, no possibility of rapid extraction if things go wrong." "Precisely," Mitchell replied, "which means we need to fight this battle on terms that neither side has experienced before." The briefing revealed the full scope of their challenge. Steinberg's regiment controlled positions that had been fortified for 18 months. They possessed intimate knowledge of local terrain, weather patterns, and optimal defensive positions. Their equipment was specifically designed for Arctic operations: white camouflage, cold weather gear, weapons tested in extreme conditions. Most critically, German intelligence had thoroughly analyzed American airborne doctrine. They expected mass drops, predetermined landing zones, heavy equipment bundles, and radio-coordinated operations. Every successful American airborne operation since Sicily had followed the same basic pattern, allowing German defenders to develop effective countermeasures. Mitchell's staff had spent 3 weeks analyzing this tactical puzzle. Traditional approaches would result in catastrophic casualties against prepared positions held by elite troops who understood airborne operations from the attacker's perspective. The solution required abandoning every principle of airborne warfare that American forces had developed through 4 years of combat experience. Wing Commander Elizabeth Hartwell examined the modified Halifax bombers assembled at RAF Scapa Flow. Each aircraft had been completely reconfigured for ultra-low altitude operations, with enhanced navigation equipment and sound dampening modifications. The 617th Squadron RAF, the famous Dam Busters, had volunteered for this mission despite its extreme risk profile. Hartwell commanded the most experienced night-flying squadron in the Royal Air Force. Her pilots had executed precision bombing raids against German industrial targets, often flying at altitudes below 100 feet to avoid radar detection. But this operation pushed even their capabilities beyond established limits. 53 aircraft would approach Norwegian positions from 9 different vectors, maintaining radio silence and flying at altitudes between 75 and 125 feet above sea level. Navigation would rely entirely on dead reckoning and celestial positioning. No radio beacons, no pathfinder support, no communication between aircraft until after personnel insertion. The technical challenges were extraordinary. Each Halifax carried only 6 paratroopers instead of 15, allowing for ultra-precision drops but reducing total force deployment efficiency. Jump altitude would be 250 feet, barely enough time for parachute deployment but necessary to avoid German radar detection. Drop speed, 85 miles per hour. Margin for navigation error, less than 200 meters. If German night fighters intercepted even one aircraft, the entire operational concept would be compromised. Luftwaffe intelligence would immediately recognize the unconventional approach and alert all defensive positions. The element of surprise, the only tactical advantage American forces possessed, would be permanently lost. Flight Lieutenant Margaret Thompson piloted the lead Halifax, carrying General Mitchell and her command team. Thompson had flown 73 combat missions over occupied Europe, including the legendary Cologne raid where she kept her damaged bomber airborne long enough for her crew to complete their bombing run. Her reputation for precision flying under impossible conditions made her the natural choice for this mission's most critical aircraft. Thompson studied weather reports with professional concern. Arctic conditions included unpredictable wind shears, sudden temperature inversions, and ice formation that could disable aircraft systems without warning. Visibility would be limited to instrument flying for most of the approach route. Even minor navigational errors could result in aircraft flying into mountainsides or dropping paratroopers into the North Sea. Helpman Anna Richter commanded the 3rd Company 4th Fallschirmjäger Regiment from positions overlooking Hammerfest Harbor. At 24, she was the youngest company commander in the German army, having earned her position through exceptional performance during the siege of Leningrad. Her 160 paratroopers controlled a 4-kilometer sector with interlocking machine gun positions and pre-registered mortar targets covering all possible approach routes.
Richter's background reflected the unconventional nature of her regiment. Born in 1920 in Vienna, she had been a championship gymnast before the war, developing the physical conditioning and spatial awareness that made her an exceptional paratrooper. Her recruitment into the experimental program came after she demonstrated superior marksmanship scores and tactical innovation during Wehrmacht training exercises. Her defensive strategy reflected German airborne doctrine adapted for mountain warfare: mobility, precision firepower, and intimate knowledge of terrain advantages. Her paratroopers had spent 4 months fortifying their positions, creating a network of bunkers and observation posts that could withstand concentrated bombardment while providing overlapping fields of fire across all likely landing zones. Each position incorporated lessons learned from previous airborne assaults. The Germans had analyzed Allied operations in Sicily, Normandy, and Holland, identifying consistent patterns in American tactical approach. Enemy paratroopers typically landed in large formations, requiring substantial clear areas for personnel and equipment deployment. They relied heavily on radio communication to coordinate unit movements and fire support requests. Richter maintained constant communication with regimental headquarters through multiple backup systems: landline telephone, radio, and visual signals using mirror flashes during daylight hours.
Intelligence briefings indicated no unusual Allied activity in northern Scotland or Iceland. Luftwaffe reconnaissance had detected no transport aircraft concentrations at British bases within range of Norwegian positions. The Hauptmann's confidence was reinforced by environmental factors. October weather in the Arctic created conditions that severely limited Allied operational capabilities. Daylight lasted only 6 hours, with frequent cloud cover reducing visibility to less than 500 meters. Temperatures below freezing would incapacitate unprotected personnel within 30 minutes of exposure. Most importantly, American forces lacked experience in Arctic warfare. Their equipment, training, and tactical doctrine were designed for temperate climates. Even elite units like the 82nd Airborne had never conducted large-scale operations above the Arctic Circle. The environmental challenges alone would neutralize much of their technical superiority. Captain Jessica O'Connor studied experimental equipment laid out in Hangar 12 at RAF Scapa Flow. As S2 intelligence officer for the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, O'Connor had developed the operational concept that would either revolutionize airborne warfare or destroy America's premier airborne division in a single night. O'Connor's background made her uniquely qualified for this challenge. The daughter of Irish immigrants, she had studied mathematics at Radcliffe College before enlisting in the Women's Army Corps. Her analytical approach to tactical problems, combined with extensive study of German military doctrine, had identified critical vulnerabilities in conventional airborne operations. Instead of mass drops into predetermined zones, American paratroopers would execute phantom insertions, individual teams of 6 operators deployed at specific coordinates across the German defensive sector. Each team carried precisely defined objectives: communication centers, supply depots, observation posts, command bunkers, or radar installations. Simultaneous attacks would create confusion while preventing coordinated German response. The key innovation was the Shadow Pack system. Instead of standard 80-pound equipment bundles, each paratrooper carried only essential weapons and 36 hours of specialized Arctic supplies. Total weight, 28 pounds per operator. This allowed precision landings in areas measuring less than 50 meters square, spaces too small for conventional airborne operations, but perfectly suited for covert insertions. O'Connor had trained extensively with British Special Operations executive veterans who had perfected similar techniques for agent insertions throughout occupied Europe. But scaling SOE methods to regimental-sized operations had never been attempted. The risks were enormous. Scattered teams could be eliminated individually if German forces responded with their typical tactical efficiency. The equipment modifications were equally revolutionary. Standard M1 Garand rifles were replaced with folding stock carbines for easier parachute operations. Radio equipment was miniaturized to 1/3 normal size while maintaining communication range. Cold weather gear incorporated lessons learned from British Arctic convoys, providing protection down to -30°C without compromising mobility. Each 6-person team included specialists trained for specific mission requirements: demolitions expert, radio operator, medic, sniper, and 2 assault specialists. Team composition reflected careful analysis of German defensive weaknesses. Most positions were designed to repel large-scale attacks rather than infiltration by highly trained small units. Major Patricia Williams commanded the 82nd Airborne's newly formed Psychological Operations Unit, a 12-person team responsible for maximizing the mental impact of the proposed operation. Williams had studied German military psychology extensively, identifying specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited through carefully planned psychological pressure. German confidence in their defensive positions was both a strength and a potential weakness. Steinberg's regiment had never faced defeat in conventional operations, creating a sense of invincibility that could become psychological vulnerability if their expectations were systematically violated. The key was creating uncertainty about enemy capabilities and intentions.
British, Williams' analysis revealed that German defensive doctrine relied heavily on pattern recognition and predictable enemy behavior. All previous Allied airborne operations had followed similar tactical sequences, allowing German commanders to develop effective countermeasures. Breaking these patterns would create cognitive dissonance and decision paralysis among enemy commanders. The psychological plan incorporated multiple deception elements. False radio transmissions would suggest large-scale conventional operations in southern Norway, drawing German attention away from the actual target area. Dummy parachute drops using mannequins and equipment bundles would create the illusion of mass insertions while concealing the true nature of small-team infiltrations. Most importantly, the timing and coordination of attacks would violate German expectations about American operational capabilities. Simultaneous strikes across multiple objectives would suggest a level of coordination and tactical sophistication that German intelligence believed was beyond American airborne forces. The strategic situation demanded unprecedented risks. German positions in northern Norway threatened vital Allied convoy routes to the Soviet Union. Steinberg's regiment controlled radar installations and observation posts that could direct U-boat attacks against merchant shipping carrying Lend-Lease supplies to Murmansk and Archangel. More critically, German forces were developing advanced rocket technology at installations near Tromsø. Intelligence indicated that V-2 missiles launched from northern Norway could reach targets in Scotland and northern England. Eliminating the defensive forces protecting these installations was essential for preventing German technological superiority from extending the war indefinitely. But failure would have catastrophic consequences beyond military considerations. The 82nd Airborne represented America's most experienced airborne unit, with combat veterans from every major operation since North Africa. Losing this force would eliminate American airborne capabilities for at least 18 months while new units were trained and equipped. Political implications were equally significant. General Mitchell's appointment as the first female airborne commander was controversial even within Allied leadership. Failure would provide ammunition for critics who argued that women lacked the tactical competence for combat command. Success, however, would demonstrate that innovative thinking could overcome conventional limitations, regardless of commander gender. The weather forecast called for overcast skies with moderate winds, optimal conditions for undetected infiltration, but challenging for precise navigation. Temperature projections indicated -15°C at ground level, creating environmental hazards that could incapacitate personnel even without enemy contact. As Mitchell signed the final operation order, she understood the historical significance. American paratroopers would attempt to defeat German paratroopers using tactics that neither side had ever employed in combat. The outcome would depend not on superior firepower or numbers, but on individual initiative, tactical innovation, and the kind of calculated audacity that defined elite airborne forces regardless of national origin. In 48 hours, the most experienced female airborne regiment in military history would face an enemy that challenged every assumption about gender roles in warfare. American paratroopers who had learned to fight like shadows in the Arctic night, led by commanders who understood that survival required abandoning every conventional approach to airborne operations. October 14, 1944, 0147 hours. The first American teams landed in scattered positions across the Nordkapp Peninsula, their phantom insertion strategy beginning to unfold exactly as Captain Jessica O'Connor had envisioned. What appeared to be catastrophic dispersion was actually surgical precision, each team landing within 200 meters of carefully selected targets that German intelligence had never identified as vulnerable. Team Bravo, led by Captain Linda Harrison, touched down in deep snow 400 meters from the primary communications bunker serving Oberst Steinberg's regimental headquarters. The location had been chosen through meticulous analysis of German communication patterns, identifying a facility that processed all tactical coordination between frontline units and divisional command.
Harrison's team moved through Arctic darkness with the silent efficiency that 8 weeks of specialized training had ingrained. Sergeant Maria Santos, demolition specialist, carried shaped charges specifically designed for destroying communication equipment without creating the massive explosions that would alert nearby positions. The objective wasn't dramatic destruction, it was surgical elimination of German coordination capabilities. 2 guards, rotating patrol pattern every 12 minutes, whispered Private Lisa Johnson, the team's sniper, who had been observing the target for 30 minutes through her scope. Interior lighting suggests minimal personnel inside. Harrison checked her watch. 02:19 hours. According to the operational timeline, simultaneous strikes would begin across the German defensive sector at precisely 02:30 hours. The coordination was critical. Isolated attacks would allow German forces to respond with concentrated strength. But simultaneous strikes would create the confusion necessary for success. At exactly 02:30 hours, 6 separate explosions erupted across the Nordkapp Peninsula as American teams executed their assignments with devastating precision. The strikes were not random acts of sabotage, but carefully orchestrated attacks designed to sever the neural networks that allowed German forces to function as a coordinated military unit.
British Team Alpha eliminated the primary radar installation at Hammerfest with thermite charges that melted critical components beyond repair. Captain Michel Rodriguez's ankle injury had forced adaptation of their assault plan, but the modified approach proved even more effective than the original concept. Instead of a direct assault on the facility, her team infiltrated during a shift change and destroyed the equipment from inside. Team Charlie struck supply depots near Catokino, but their target selection revealed the sophisticated intelligence that had guided American planning. Rather than destroying bulk supplies that could be replaced, Captain Susan Wright's demolitions expert focused on specialized Arctic equipment and communication spare parts that were irreplaceable in the short term. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. German forces throughout the region lost the technological advantages that had made their defensive positions nearly impregnable. Without radar, they were blind to aircraft movements. Without communication equipment, they could not coordinate responses to multiple threats. Without specialized supplies, they could not maintain their equipment in Arctic conditions. Oberst Helena Steinberg first understood the scope of the disaster when her primary communication link with divisional headquarters went silent at 0234 hours. Initial assumption was equipment failure caused by Arctic weather conditions, but the systematic nature of simultaneous problems across multiple systems suggested something far more serious. All company commanders report status immediately, Steinberg transmitted on backup radio frequencies. The responses revealed the tactical nightmare she had never considered possible. Her regiment was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that had somehow achieved complete surprise despite impossible weather conditions. Major Ingrid Muller's report from the Alta sector was typical. Observation Post 7 is not responding. Radar installation reports complete equipment failure. Supply depot shows evidence of selective sabotage targeting critical components only. Hauptmann Anna Richter added her own disturbing intelligence. Patrol reports finding American parachute equipment, but no personnel. Evidence suggests highly trained infiltration teams operating with detailed knowledge of our positions and vulnerabilities. Steinberg realized with growing horror that her regiment was facing exactly the kind of operation she had trained to execute against enemy forces. Small, highly trained teams with specific objectives operating independently but with coordinated timing. The Americans had learned German special operations doctrine and applied it with devastating effectiveness. The brilliance of the American strategy became apparent as German response efforts began to fail systematically. Traditional counterintelligence doctrine required concentrating forces to hunt down infiltration teams, but the scattered nature of American operations made it impossible without abandoning defensive positions entirely. General Mitchell's command team, despite landing 8 kilometers from their intended position, had established radio contact with 4 of the 6 operational teams by 0300 hours.
The communication network that German forces had lost was being rebuilt by American forces using portable equipment that German intelligence had never detected during pre-mission reconnaissance. "Command to all teams," Mitchell transmitted from her concealed position in an abandoned mining shed. "Phase 1 objectives achieved. German coordination capabilities eliminated. Proceed to Phase 2 operations immediately." Phase 2 revealed the true sophistication of American planning. Rather than attempting to hold captured positions against superior enemy numbers, American teams would execute what O'Connor had termed tactical dissolution, disappearing into terrain that German forces could not effectively search while maintaining the ability to strike again when opportunities presented themselves. Team Delta, commanded by Captain Jennifer Walsh, demonstrated the technique perfectly. After destroying their assigned observation post, the team divided into 3 pairs that moved to separate concealment positions. German patrols searching for 6 Americans found nothing, because there were no longer 6 Americans in any single location. The success of unconventional operations often depends on individual actions that exceed the scope of normal military training. Sergeant David Park, whose radio equipment had been damaged during insertion, improvised a communication link using components salvaged from destroyed German equipment and spare parts from his own damaged radio. Park's technical innovation allowed isolated teams to maintain contact despite equipment failures that should have eliminated their coordination capabilities. His improvised network provided American forces with communication range exceeding that of remaining German equipment, creating a tactical advantage that transformed scattered teams into a coordinated force. Private Patricia O'Malley, Team Alpha's medic, found herself treating a wounded German soldier whose patrol had stumbled into their position during withdrawal from the radar installation. Rather than eliminating a potential intelligence source, O'Malley provided medical treatment while her team leader conducted tactical interrogation that revealed German search patterns and response procedures. The intelligence gained from this encounter allowed American teams to avoid German patrols while positioning themselves for subsequent operations. O'Malley's decision to treat an enemy soldier had provided tactical intelligence worth more than eliminating one German patrol member.
Major Patricia Williams' psychological operations plan achieved effects beyond even optimistic projections. German forces, expecting conventional airborne operations, found themselves facing an enemy that violated every assumption about American tactical capabilities. The confusion created decision paralysis among German commanders who could not identify patterns that allowed effective response. Steinberg found herself facing the commander's ultimate nightmare, an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. American teams struck with precision, then vanished before German forces could respond. Attempts to pursue resulted in patrols searching empty terrain, while other positions came under attack from unexpected directions. "They are fighting like Fallschirmjäger," Mueller reported with grudging professional respect. "Small teams, specific objectives, independent operation with coordinated timing. This is German doctrine applied by American forces." The psychological impact extended beyond tactical confusion. German confidence in their defensive positions had been shattered by an enemy that had penetrated supposedly secure installations without being detected. The invincibility that Steinberg's regiment had maintained through 3 years of combat was destroyed in a single night of operations. By 0400 hours, the tactical situation had been completely reversed. German forces that had controlled a 60-kilometer defensive sector found themselves isolated in scattered positions, unable to communicate effectively or coordinate responses to continuing American operations. The regiment that had never been defeated in conventional operations was being systematically dismantled by unconventional tactics. American teams, despite landing scattered across hostile territory under impossible weather conditions, had achieved tactical coordination that exceeded their pre-mission planning. The apparent chaos of scattered insertions had created exactly the kind of multi-directional pressure that German defensive doctrine could not effectively counter. General Mitchell established her command post in a location that provided radio contact with all operational teams while remaining undetectable to German search efforts. The communication network that linked scattered American teams was more effective than the system German forces had lost, creating a tactical advantage that continued to expand as operations proceeded. Steinberg attempted to implement counter-infiltration procedures based on her own training in special operations, but found that conventional responses were inadequate against truly innovative tactics. Concentrating forces to hunt American teams left defensive positions vulnerable to attack. Maintaining dispersed positions prevented effective pursuit of infiltration teams. "We are fighting an enemy that has learned from our own doctrine and improved upon it," Steinberg reported to divisional headquarters during her last successful communication. "Request immediate reinforcement with specialized counter-infiltration units." The response was devastating. "No reinforcements available. Maintain positions using available resources. Do not abandon defensive sector under any circumstances." Steinberg realized that her regiment was facing elimination without the possibility of tactical withdrawal or reinforcement. The Americans had achieved the strategic objective of isolating her forces while eliminating their ability to coordinate effective defense. At 0500 hours, American teams executed their final phase operations with precision that demonstrated complete tactical dominance. Rather than attempting to hold captured positions, teams struck remaining German strongpoints and immediately withdrew to concealed positions that German forces could not locate. Team Echo, which had been held in reserve due to aircraft mechanical problems, finally inserted via emergency drop to eliminate the last functioning German radar installation. Captain Margaret Foster's team accomplished their mission within 20 minutes of landing, using intelligence provided by other teams to avoid German patrols and approach their target from an unexpected direction. The final radar destruction eliminated the last German early warning capability, ensuring that subsequent Allied operations could proceed without detection. More importantly, it demonstrated American ability to adapt tactical plans in real time while maintaining operational security despite equipment failures and navigation errors. As Arctic dawn broke over the Nordkapp Peninsula, the tactical transformation was complete. Oberst Steinberg's regiment, which had controlled a critical defensive sector for 18 months, had been effectively eliminated as a combat force without a single large-scale engagement. American casualties were minimal: 2 personnel wounded during landing, no combat losses, no captured personnel. German casualties were equally light in terms of personnel, but catastrophic in terms of capability. Without communication, radar, specialized equipment, and coordination abilities, the regiment could no longer function as an effective military unit. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. German defensive doctrine throughout occupied Europe was based on the assumption that elite units could hold critical positions against superior numbers through technological advantages and tactical coordination. The destruction of Steinberg's regiment demonstrated that these assumptions were vulnerable to innovative tactical approaches.
British General Mitchell's after-action report would revolutionize American special operations doctrine for the remainder of the war and beyond. The phantom insertion technique proved that small, highly trained teams could achieve strategic effects that conventional airborne operations could not accomplish even with overwhelming force. The key insight was that apparent tactical disadvantage, scattered insertion, equipment failures, navigation errors, could become strategic advantage when exploited by personnel trained to adapt rather than follow predetermined plans. American teams had succeeded because they were prepared to improvise rather than execute rigid tactical procedures. Captain Linda Harrison's team, which had initiated the cascade of strikes against German communications, exemplified the personal courage that made tactical innovation possible. Operating behind enemy lines, in Arctic conditions, with minimal equipment and no possibility of extraction if operations failed, required individual initiative that exceeded normal military training. Sergeant Maria Santos, whose demolitions expertise had eliminated critical German capabilities, received field promotion to staff sergeant for her technical innovation under combat conditions. Her modification of standard demolition techniques for Arctic operations would become doctrine for subsequent special operations in extreme environments. The operation's success validated the controversial decision to employ female leadership in special operations roles. General Mitchell's tactical innovations and Captain O'Connor's strategic planning had achieved results that conventional approaches could not match, demonstrating that innovative thinking was more important than traditional military hierarchies. By 0600 hours, the most experienced female airborne regiment in military history had been defeated by an enemy that refused to fight according to established rules. American paratroopers had demonstrated that tactical innovation, individual initiative, and adaptive thinking could overcome superior numbers, defensive advantages, and environmental challenges. Oberst Steinberg, in her final radio transmission before communication systems failed completely, provided the most accurate assessment. The Americans have learned to fight as we train to fight, but they have improved our methods beyond our own capabilities. This is not defeat by superior force, this is defeat by superior innovation. The phantom insertions that had seemed like desperate improvisation revealed themselves as surgical precision. The scattered landings that appeared to be navigation failures were actually tactical genius. The equipment problems that threatened mission success became opportunities for technical innovation that exceeded original planning. In a single night of Arctic operations, American Special Forces had rewritten the principles of unconventional warfare. The legacy of that night would influence military doctrine for generations, proving that the greatest tactical advantage was not superior equipment or overwhelming numbers, but the ability to adapt, innovate, and fight in ways that the enemy could not predict or counter. The most experienced female paratroopers in military history had been defeated, not by conventional force, but by opponents who understood that the future of warfare belonged to those willing to abandon conventional thinking entirely. October 15, 1944, 0800 hours. General Mitchell stood in the ruins of Oberst Steinberg's command post, studying the tactical maps that revealed the complete scope of American success. In 12 hours of operations, 6 small teams had eliminated an entire German regiment's combat effectiveness without firing a single shot in direct engagement. The casualty reports told the story. American losses totaled 3 wounded, no killed, no missing. German losses were equally minimal in personnel, but catastrophic in capability. Without communication networks, radar systems, and specialized equipment, Steinberg's elite regiment had become isolated garrison units incapable of coordinated defense. Steinberg herself had requested a meeting under white flag at 0630 hours. The conversation between the 2 female commanders would be recorded by military historians as a pivotal moment in the evolution of warfare doctrine. "Your operation violated every principle of airborne warfare I understood," Steinberg admitted with professional respect. "We prepared for conventional assault and faced something entirely different." Mitchell nodded, understanding the professional devastation her opponent felt. "We learned from studying your own doctrine, then adapted it beyond recognition. The key was accepting that apparent failure could become tactical advantage." Within 48 hours, news of the Nordkapp operation reached Allied headquarters throughout Europe. The tactical innovation demonstrated by Mitchell's teams would influence special operations planning for the remainder of the war and decades beyond. The concept of phantom insertion became standard doctrine for elite units facing superior defensive positions. More significantly, the operation proved that innovative thinking could overcome conventional military advantages, regardless of gender, nationality, or traditional approaches to warfare. Both Steinberg and Mitchell had demonstrated tactical competence that exceeded most male commanders, challenging assumptions about women's roles in combat operations. Captain Linda Harrison received the Distinguished Service Cross for her team's performance, but the psychological impact of leading operations behind enemy lines would affect her for years. The isolation, responsibility, and constant threat of capture created stress levels that peacetime military service could never replicate. Sergeant Maria Santos was promoted to second lieutenant and assigned to develop demolitions training for special operations units. Her technical innovations during the Arctic operation became standard equipment for cold weather missions throughout the European theater. The American military establishment, initially skeptical of unconventional tactics, was forced to acknowledge that traditional airborne doctrine had fundamental limitations. General Mitchell was promoted to full colonel and assigned to develop training programs based on lessons learned from the Nordkapp operation. The Shadow Pack equipment system became standard issue for special operations units. The psychological warfare techniques proved equally valuable. demonstrating that cognitive disruption could be more effective than physical destruction in neutralizing enemy capabilities. As Mitchell prepared her final after-action report, she reflected on the operation's most important insight. Military success belonged to forces willing to abandon preconceptions and adapt to unprecedented situations. The phantom insertion technique succeeded because it violated expectations rather than following established patterns. The legacy of that Arctic night would influence warfare for generations. Elite military units worldwide would study the operation as proof that innovation, adaptation, and individual initiative remain the ultimate technical advantages, regardless of technological superiority or numerical strength. In the end, the most experienced female paratroopers in military history had taught each other the most valuable lesson of modern warfare. Victory belonged to those who dared to fight in ways the enemy could never predict.